welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. We are live in studio with our guest today. We're going to get to him in a second. Listen, if you have any questions or comments, you can participate in the show here while we're talking. We'll get to as many audience questions as we can. All you got to do is leave your question in the comment box below. So whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch, you can participate into today's discussion. We're going to have a fun one about technology, and we just got a message here from Alexi who says, really looking forward to this segment. Good luck, Shane.
I'll need it.
Are you going to need luck?
I might, yeah. Thanks, Alexi. I appreciate that.
Okay, today's guest is Shane Thomas, and Shane Thomas works for Farmer's Edge, but he also puts out an excellent e-newsletter. It goes out weekly, or how often do you put it out?
Yeah, every Sunday put it out.
Every Sunday.
Yep.
It is called Upstream Ag Insights. It is really, really cool. We're going to talk about it in a little second. Today we're going to talk about the overall tech space, what's happening in agriculture. Of course, so much interest from venture capitalists in terms of developing products and really expanding the innovation in the space. Agriculture is an interesting space for funders, but there's a lot happening and there's some trends kind of developing, and we're going to get to all of that. Definitely. You ready for it, Shane?
I think so.
Yeah, you sure?
Yeah, I got the luck now, so we'll be ready to rock and roll.
We're good to go.
Yep.
Okay, and like I said, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment box, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. Okay, Shane, one of the things that you pointed out to me is that actually investment year over year, we're actually flat. Mm-hmm. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so from a VC perspective, if you look at the venture capital dollars going into the agri-food and ag tech space, we're actually flat year over year from 2019 to 2020 in the first half. There was just a report put out by Ag Funder News. And they really showcase that. And if you look at the greater venture funding, the fintech and all the other technology space, you see that actually things shrunk by, I think, 7 or 6%, something like that. So we're seeing decreases there. And I think a lot of people expected that in the ag tech space in the first half, just with everything going on in the world these days. But we actually seen flat and the upstream, so the segment of the market that's closer to the farm and the production of the grains was I think slightly up even compared to flat. And so when you look at that, I get asked, well, what does that mean? Is it good? Is it bad? And I think generally speaking, the investment in all these technologies is good for farmers. It's good for the industry. That means that there's new technology being developed, and there's new call it individuals coming into the space with their bright ideas, new possibilities, and hopefully bringing things that truly benefit the farm and the industry. And so you get that initial kind of launch into new technology, but we still have those fragmented components today where you have these kind of one-off pieces and farmers can't have 20 apps and all these sorts of things. And so when you start to look at this moving forward, I know I've talked with a few individuals in the VC space and in the industry at large, and they're saying, hey, you know what, things might actually be a little bit bloated or a little bit overpriced. And so if you start to look at the benefit of that to the farmer, well, could there be some of these tech companies that are had some large funding in the past get acquired, get tied together and integrated into a solution that can fit the farmer in more of a one-stop shop, so to speak. And so that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it feels like we've kind of, I don't know if we've matured, but it feels like we're growing up a little bit, right? So. Like we know this. We know that the sort of the micro pay model would never work in agriculture. You can't survive selling an app for $5 to, even if you had all the farmers, you still would not be financially. You'd be really, really in pretty tough shape, I think. We've gone through like the super complex solutions that are out there, where it all looks good, and if you had nothing but time to enter everything, hey, really, really good solution. But nobody can use it because nobody actually knows how to use it. The user experience is just, it's so critical. And Apple has really taught us that. Like they have made really a $2 trillion market cap fortune by being simple.
Yeah, unbelievably simple and integrating it all together as well, all those different pieces of hardware. And so, I think one of the things, and we talk about it a lot, but I do think now instead of the talk, there's a lot more of this happening where there is more expertise in the space. So again, it does have to be a streamlined user experience for the farmer and the agronomist and the other individuals in the industry. But I think the interesting part is you have the old colleges, the Lakeland colleges that are actually putting out these trainings and these degrees and building out this program that can help I guess educate the industry so that farmers can have a better understanding of what's going on. And I think there always will be some, there's going to be a little bit of time needing to be spent to input some of this information into these apps and that, but I think we're going to have a better understanding and better expertise coming into the industry continually from now on.
We've definitely had a cull, and in $3 corn in the U.S. will cull a lot of people trying to do things in the tech space, depending on what your solution is. I think it's been a real challenge for the entire ag tech space is to try to figure out how to steer through this.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, you look at it today and the first thing to go, everybody knows that, we got to have the herbicide, we got to have the seed, and 100%. And today, the digital and some of these other technological solutions have not integrated themselves into that, call it foundational every single year use case. And I think we'll start to see that again. I think it's frustrating for farmers, obviously, but Farmer's Edge, for example, working to make that a lot more simple, make that be a foundational part of the farmers every single year team, or call it uses every single year. And so I think we're it's tough to say we're headed in the right direction consistently, because I know there's so many different pieces of technology, but I think if you kind of navigate the space in its entirety, things are trending uphill. As much as some days I think there's some farmers that would slap me for saying that, but but I do think if you kind of break it all down, I think we are starting to see some positive movement for sure. And
we're seeing some interesting trends continue, I think, And I've been to 3 Agritechnicas now. Mm-hmm. This sort of see and spray tech, that is an area where I think there seems to be some continued interest. One, to reduce the amount of herbicide usage as we sort of have this battle with the consumer on some of the the broad use of some of these products, but also from a farmer's perspective to try to cut back on some of their application costs.
Yeah, we were talking just before about products looking for problems, whereas you look at the See and Spray, it really fits 2 big things. You have the macro trends of the sustainability and the less pesticide use and that sort of thing from the end consumer, but then you have the farmer, and it's a really easy to see linear ROI. I'm spraying 20% less, or I'm spraying 30% less, and I'm still getting the same sort of control. So I think it's really solid in that regard. And we start to we hear a lot about adoption, and AutoSteer was a really fast adoption, and I do think that once we start to get some of the See and Spray technology really finely tuned, so more training data for the models, more understanding from a nozzle perspective, all that, I think we will see an adoption rate that probably is more significant than some of the other technology we've seen in the space.
One of the other cool things that I've heard about the See and Spray, and just so everyone's clear what we're talking about, is where robot, or quite frankly even today's sprayer, goes through the field, senses the weed to eradicate, kill, and sprays.
100%.
Now, when you go to a place like Agritechnica, a lot of that is robotic driven. They're talking about they're kind of combining numerous things. But we're a ways to go on all of this. Never mind. But I think the robot makes more sense in the sense that it's going slower.
Yep.
Right. To put See and Spray on a current machine, you won't be driving 20 miles an hour. No. And so it'll be a lot slower of a process.
Yep.
When we look at all this, the other piece I hear from some of the crop protection companies is, okay, if we're only applying it to the weeds, if we have a product we're only applying to the weeds, we may be able to go back into our tickle trunk, so to speak, for all of you Mr. Dress-Up fans, go back into our tickle trunk and find some formulations that didn't work as broadacre solution, like sort of broad spray applications, because we couldn't find the right concentrations. But if we're only spraying it on a weed, we may find some old products we put on a shelf and could actually work in that scenario.
100%. I think that's one exciting part for sure. You have the dosage. Maybe it had to be applied at a high rate. Now it's more manageable. But even from a costing perspective, all of a sudden you had something that would have cost $300 for a liter or something at scale to produce. Now all of a sudden you're only putting 20 liters on per quarter or something like that, right? All of a sudden it gets to be a lot more reasonable and can help manage, challenges that we see, resistance and all that. But even the MRL issue, which I think, there was an announcement from Protein Industries Canada this week into Precision AI. And I think, they didn't get into the specifics of what they're attempting to do, but just based on some of the other partners within that development and within that, call it cluster or component, it sounds like they're really going to look at, okay, how can we actually spray in the fall from a pre-harvest perspective and not get into trouble from an MRL perspective? Is there something there? And so now all of a sudden you're managing resistance, you're able to manage costs, you're able to manage MRL. So you're checking so many boxes with this technology that it's pretty exciting.
I found it interesting. I wondered if, and I haven't asked Protein Industries Canada about this, but when I first read that release, them funding See and Spray, is this an expansion of the mandate? Because previously they've been working on things like more of the research side from a creating proteins or breeding as it applies to developing proteins or processing capacity. But this seemed like something new, so it was interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's expanding. Okay, well, part of it is just getting these proteins to market in a traceable way or in a way that doesn't increase risk for the consumer. So it could be very well for sure.
Okay, let's back up the truck here a little bit. We got a question from Lara, who says, "Hey Shane, what made you want to start your own e-newsletter? Can you tell us a bit about the content you include in it?"
Oh, man. So I guess, to start this way back, I got to give Shaun a shout out. So the reason I started writing in general, I used to write agronomy newsletters and articles, and it was because when I first joined Twitter in 2011 or something like that, Shaun said, "Hey, you want to write an article for the website for Real Agriculture?" And I was like, what do you want me to write it on? And you're like, "Whatever you want." And so I wrote like these. I had no idea what I was doing, but I wrote, I think it was on snake oil and like how do you determine whether something is legitimate or not. And so anyways, the reason I say that is when it comes to writing, what I found through starting that writing process is that you can really, you're forced to learn, you're forced to think critically, you're forced to put your thoughts and opinions kind of out in the world for everybody to see, and you can get a real solid feedback loop of your thought process and logic applied. And another example from when I wrote an article for RealAg is Tom Wolfe reached out to me and was like, "Hey Shane, like I think you were wrong. I think you put this in here, you worded this a little poorly. Just so you know, I'm not trying to criticize, but," and I was like, "Hey, like I don't want to be putting wrong information out into the world by any means." And so I edited it, and that was a real good indication that, hey, you know what, you can learn really, really fast from very smart people like Tom Wolfe by putting your ideas and thoughts out there. And so when it came to upstream, where that comes from is upstream is in the value chain of agriculture. I've grown to have a bit of a fascination with business strategy and technology and where the ag industry as a whole is going. And what I've really tried to do is just kind of take everything that's going on in the ag industry space, from ag retail to ag tech to crop inputs, so biologicals, to the crop protection, to the fertilizer. I even start to dive into annual reports of some of the large publicly traded agribusinesses and assess, what are they doing? How does their strategy fit? How is their profitability going along? What's actually contributing to that? So I touch on, I usually include anywhere from 12 to 20 stories where I'll highlight a kind of a core paragraph, and then I'll usually have another 10 links or so that I find interesting. And so I'm constantly reading a bunch of different stuff. Sometimes I include RealAg articles in there as well. And it's just really for myself to stay abreast of what's going on in the industry, and then to think critically about what's actually happening. And I write down my thoughts of what the implications I think might be or could be for the industry and for farmers and for agribusinesses.
Well, clearly you're interested in it though too.
Yeah,
like you're pretty keenly interested in.
Yeah,
and I think what's neat about the topic is that there's what's happening on the farmer facing end of it. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the chess pieces aligning in the background that there's this whole, like I remember one time I went to this investor conference, Ag Tech, I think it was called Ag Tech actually, in San Francisco.
Yep.
And I went to it and I realized that there was this whole, like I knew maybe 3 people there.
Yeah.
If I remember right, actually Wade Barnes was one of the people that was there, as well as, if I remember right, Rob Syke was there too,
Oh, yep.
which shouldn't surprise
Makes sense,
anybody.
Yep.
But there was this whole conversation, like it was like a different world,
Yep.
right? It was like this whole industry in itself, and companies with ideas or people that actually had products trying to convince people like, you should invest with me.
Yep.
I need some money to make my idea actually come to fruition.
Yeah.
Some people get the funding, some people don't. Some people get the funding and then they need more. It's like this whole vicious circle.
Yeah, the VC space, I won't claim to be an expert. I just got interested in it really once I started this, but over the last couple of years, and it's a whole different veil of what's going on. And you mentioned chess pieces, and that's what a lot of it comes down to is, okay, what are we doing and why are we doing this? How does this benefit our customer 10 years down the road, and what investments do we need to make to do this so that we can not only benefit our customer, but then be profitable and increase revenues and all these sorts of things. And so it really adds layers to the agriculture conversation, and it's fun to think about, and there's a lot of interesting people out there that are involved in it, that's for sure.
Shane brought up the part about how he was writing for Real Agriculture. He didn't bring up the part where he quit writing for Real Agriculture, but we won't put too much pressure on him. Viren says, apart from the dairy farming and maybe pork, precision ag hasn't seen a big uptake in the livestock sector. Is there a lot of potential there, or is there a barrier?
Oh man, I wouldn't claim to be an expert in that. I don't know if I can give you any insight, Viren, but I do have a colleague on Twitter that I talk with her relatively frequently, Jeanette Barnard, and she talks a lot about the tech in that animal and the protein space, and I subscribe to her newsletter personally as well, and she's constantly talking about all these different implications, what the Tyson should do, what these dairy companies need to be thinking about, and so I encourage you, I can shoot you a message actually and connect you with her, but I can't provide you any real good insight in that space. I won't even pretend to have any insight.
Viren alludes to it. I think dairy farmers kind of laugh at broadacre farmers when they talk about, the future of robotics. Dairy farmers are like, psst, been doing it for years.
Yeah, that's true.
The future of robots.
Well, and they got tags and ears and stuff to understand the vitals of the cows
high frequency tags, low frequency tags. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
About sensors. We talk about sensors in the crop and having one on a 160 acre field. Having one right in that living organism that is producing, that's pretty cool. There's so much potential, it seems like, in that space. I have no idea what's actually going on.
Yeah, I always enjoy when we go to Agritechnica to go to the Bosch booth.
Oh yeah.
Well, they have very, very good buns this last time, so we stuck around a little bit longer to enjoy some of the food. That's one of the things,
buns, hey?
They were good.
Interesting.
They were like buns. They were like rolls. They were just...
I mostly had beer at the Agritechnica
booths,
yeah. But that's interesting.
Well, they try to lure you into the booth, and they try to keep you there as media people by just feeding you food and beer.
Yeah, don't feed the models, feed the media people. There we go.
Yeah, but Bosch, they're a company that has sensor technology, and they're trying to figure out as many different ways to use those sensors across all these platforms.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I was at their booth. It's super, I don't remember in the entirety of it, but they were, they had, call it cuticle sensors to be able to understand what the moisture levels were like in the plant and the temperature of the plant and moisture probes. Then they have obviously the connection with Zarvio and the See and Spray technology there. Bosch is a big one. So yeah, they're a very cool company, and that's where there is a lot of these traditional external companies looking at agriculture. You have Microsoft and Land O'Lakes partnering, those sorts of things. So it's interesting.
So I've been corrected. Producer Jay has put a message to me. It says they weren't buns, they were pretzels.
Oh, well. Salted, so that's
better. Good. They were good. We did one interview just so we could get the one pretzel, and then the pretzel was so good, we're like, hey, there has to be a second interview that we can do. It's sort of like, when you're trying to train your puppy. Yeah. It's like, do a trick and I'll give you some more treats. That's how we were, for sure. So as we look at the space, because I get these infographics from, is it Egg Funder?
Yep.
Where they do and they'll show here's the categories, and then they show all the logos of the companies that are in those spaces. you're like, I never heard of them,
and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. They put like some of the main ones in there. It's overwhelming, is what it is. And even I always get a kick because you talk with some of these individuals that are a part of those companies. They're like, well, I don't belong in this part of the space. I belong in this one. And so but it's such a complex space that people are really just hey, let's try and simplify this for people to try and understand what's going on. And it's an interesting space, that's for sure.
Kara asks, in today's electronic world, how do you feel technology on machinery will change in the next 10 years? Do you see a switch going back to the basics? Interesting. The Luddite factor.
Yeah, and I won't. That's not something I think too much on, but I'll maybe think from a Farmer's Edge perspective on this, and I think myself coming into Farmer's Edge, I would never have anticipated the amount of interest in what's going on in the field you're in the cab, and having an actual cab experience for the farmer, so you can see the weather, so you can see what's being applied, so you can see your speed, all these different things that you kind of already have, but farmers love looking at. And I think that we'll see more interest in that. I know Farmer's Edge has a tool for that, and I think there's other companies like the Climates that have that as well. And so it's interesting. I don't know exactly what that will look like in the future. I know when you start to look at the John Deeres of the cab of the future, where it's basically you're just sitting there with no steering wheel, and maybe you have like a pop-up screen and you touch it and things are automatic.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's I don't know what that is going to look like, but that one will be interesting to see how things actually go. That's for sure.
Well, if this wasn't a one-man band here, we would actually, what I would say is I'd call up that clip and say, well, hey, let's look at the John Deere cab of the future. But I don't have it queued up, so we can't do that. But exactly right. There's no steering wheel. AGCO, with their Fendt, with their Ideal Combine, but I'm forgetting the version number, they had no steering wheel. And it was amazing. We talk about all this tech and how, a lot of pressure to be on the cutting edge, but there was a lot of farmers that were like, I actually like a steering wheel.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree. Yeah.
And so I think companies and manufacturers, for sure on the machinery side, have to be a little bit cautious how they roll these things out.
100%.
And if they are going to roll out a no steering wheel tractor, boy, they better have it figured out and making it easy to use.
Yeah.
Or else people are going to no.
Yeah, I would imagine, if you look at John Deere, they have entire teams looking at that, and so you're right, that's 100% got to be something that they're thinking about consistently. Just what is that user experience? We talked about user experience of the digital technology, but what is that user experience for a farmer that has a wheel-less drive wheel-less tractor? I mean, it'll be interesting. And you start to think towards the future, and maybe you start to have some of the really young people, the kids that are just being born today, they'll grow up and they'll maybe see driverless cars and that sort of thing, and it'll just be something that's more natural, but it'll be a really strange experience for people to start, I think.
Yeah, and I can see both sides here. I could see a tractor manufacturer saying, hey, listen, do we have a deal for you? We've created a tractor that you can repair yourself.
Yeah. You
can drive yourself, and maybe even choose whatever color you want. I don't know, whatever the third option is.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think that there's we didn't see that in some other technological advances.
Right.
Do we have farmers today craving steel wheels? Maybe in some Amish circles, but for the most part, the mainstream of farmers, the bulk of farmers that companies are marketing to, there's nobody craving for steel wheels or, hey, can I get a horse-drawn version of this?
Yeah.
So I think we got to be a little bit careful that we don't assume that there's going to be this massive revolt back to what was something in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And there's this quote, and I'll butcher it, but for the extent, Will Durant was a historian, and he talks. He has this quote in his one book, the Lessons of History, and it essentially says that you need to have those progressive people just as much as you need to have those more conservative, old school thinking people, and it's really the two of them going at it about their ideas, the concepts that really get the right ideas out into into the world, whether that's, you or I sitting in front of all these fancy pieces of technology, or a farmer, there's going to be these ideas came up with, and that's good because they come out into the world, we test them, we see if they work or don't work, and if they don't, they're going to go by way of the dinosaurs, so to speak, right?
Oh yeah, this is quite the technological setup here. Don't oversell it.
I was impressed when I walked in.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. It gets better and better all the time. I remember my wife and I went to New York a couple of years ago for it was she gave me it was my birthday present. Nice. So I have some relatives in New York, so we went to Manhattan. So a part of it was I negotiated my way to a tour of the Sirius radio studios through Rural Radio, right? And we got there. The guy's giving us the tour, and he's like, "Oh, you should have been here yesterday. Chewbacca was here." So anyway, but same sort of thing. Like you go to Sirius's website and you see like this backdrop. They're doing concerts, and you think this is this massive auditorium. The room's like 10 by 10.
Oh wow!
Where they do it. And as we're walking around, you see the MLB Radio Network studios, the NHL Network, and you're kind of going through all these rooms. The guy's like, "Hey, tell me about your studio." I'm like, it's a little bit less sophisticated than this. Right? It's like, let's not talk about it.
Yeah, we won't go there today.
But it was neat because you kind of see behind the scenes where, the person that's the DJ that day for the Highway or Octane or Hair Nation, they virtually sit in a cubicle. And they're like
that's cool.
Like it was kind of neat.
That'd be
see.
really, really cool.
Yeah. One of the trends you're seeing is in irrigation. Now, it doesn't cover, comparatively speaking, it's not a tremendous amount of acres, but we do have some major, irrigation companies that are really finding some ground here to run on in terms of the precision space.
Yeah, I found it super interesting, and I won't claim to be an expert in irrigation technology and pivots and all these sorts of things, but you look at the main organizations in the Lindsays and the Rinkies and the Valleys, for example, and every single one of them have made major moves and major acquisitions in the tech space. You have Lindsay partnering with Farmers Edge. You have Rinky just made a strategic partnership with CropX, which is a tech company out of Israel, and then you have Prospera and the Valley Group, and so you have these irrigation organizations really looking to help the farmer. And I think there's two prongs to it, and the big thing is, if you have sensors understanding the soil texture, the soil type, you understand the moisture levels, you can much more accurately irrigate. You can understand what your evapotranspiration is. You can understand what just the evaporation out of the nozzles and the efficiency of those is. You can understand the pumping levels. You kind of have like a smart watch for the pivot, so it can understand exactly how much water is pumping through there. And so I really think there's a big trend towards that, just because of the sustainability as well. When you start to look at the amount of water that's used in agriculture from a global perspective, huge. And even within that, this is more what I probably talk about in my newsletter from a business perspective. You have these organizations that sell a pivot, so their revenue's up on that customer for the 1 year. They have maintenance and all those sorts of things, but then I don't know how long a pivot lasts, 15 years, maybe a little more than that.
Some are even older. Yeah.
Older than that. Yeah. Then 20 years later, you buy another one. And so how do you kind of smooth out that revenue and benefit that customer all the way along doing that? So now you get more data on them to, again, support them in a more meaningful way, but obviously benefit your business. And so you kind of have those trends moving that, I think.
And when we talk about sustainability, I think this, pivot irrigation is a good example. Think about the hand move. And, you moved it as often as you felt the energy to go move it. You basically saturate the soil as much as possible, move it, and, kind of continue through the field. Then we had the wheel moves. And anybody like me that grew up on an irrigation farm has nightmares about moving pipe. And then, then we transitioned to pivots. And, the first pivots were where the sprinkler was up top. Right? It's out in the wind. It's out in the sun. Tons of evaporation by the time that water actually hits the ground. Well, then we moved to drop sprinklers. Well, then wait a minute. We're still wasting water. Then we moved to like sort of the wobblers, right? They're kind of going like this and all that kind of stuff. And then you see on some farms where actually, especially in the veg and special crops, where those pipes actually are like super close to the ground.
Yep.
So even just how we apply the water has changed immensely in our lifetime. You're younger than me, but I
did
you ever have to move pipe?
No, I didn't, but I've heard horror stories about it. It does not seem like any fun at all. Just
it is not.
The time and it doesn't seem like any fun at all. But it's obviously instrumental to in Las Vegas. You get down to Nebraska, the U.S. and obviously southern Alberta where we are today. There's a lot of GDP contributed because of what irrigation brings to the area, and the improvements in that are awesome for farmers and consumers as a whole.
Lindsay says, do you mean irrigation or irritation? I mean, it depends if you're the one that's moving the pipe or not.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. One of the topics I wanted to make sure we cover here is the discussion around, because there is not a seed company or an ag chem company that I don't talk to that doesn't want to talk about what are farmers telling you about ag retail online.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of interest here. Of course, there are the lead. I think when we talk about ag retail online, a lot of people jump to, well, of course, FBN, Farmers Business Network. That's that's their kind of their wheelhouse, I would say. But we also have some of the regular sort of what would you call them? The more concrete, traditional retail,
bricks and mortar retail.
Nutrien. They talked about a huge amount of business that they did this past spring in the U.S. and Canada through their online portal. This is going to be a competitive space.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I could probably sit and talk all day on it, but I think, too many get caught up in, in Nutrien, for example, they had hundreds of millions and they said, 45% of their sales were online, and people were getting caught up in the semantics of, what did that entail and all that. And to me, it's not even necessarily important whether you transact in the sense of how we think of Amazon, where, you want to buy a new coffee mug, you go on there, search coffee mugs, and you purchase and it ships and all that. Credit card number's already in there. Whereas with retail, it's a business, and you're trying to make sure that you can support that customer in a number of ways. And so, I might come into Shaun, Haney Ag Retail and say, you know what, I want to buy my glyphosate. I might do everything through you. I might go in there and pay, but then I'm sitting with my banker, 3 months later, and I want to look at what I actually paid for that glyphosate. I want to look at what actually I have prepaid. And so now all of a sudden, the digital portal side of things, which is really the omni-channel approach, so you're supporting your customer through digital means. Now all of a sudden, I can pull that up on my phone via an app and say, oh yeah, here's all my numbers. I can send them to you right here. And so even though that transaction didn't occur, there is still an online component. And I always talk about it from a bank perspective where, you know what, I look at a bank today. I would never deal with a bank that didn't have an app where I could send money to my dad if I owed him money, or I couldn't see what was going on in my bank account. I couldn't see what from an investment perspective. It's crazy to think about, and I think in 10 years from an ag retail perspective, we'll be saying the same things. Farmers will want to have access to that, whether they truly transact or not. It won't be the point. It's that there's mediums or mechanisms to be able to reach them, support them, and enhance that relationship, because everybody talks about the relationship is so key in ag retail, and it is, and so I think there's a couple different components going on within it, and I think that's part of where we'll see some of the retail, specifically from a Western Canadian perspective, begin to transition to.
Yeah, do I think the salesperson, the territory manager, do I think that is a job that's going to be gone tomorrow? Absolutely not. No. But I'll put it in this context: Best Buy and Future Shop. Okay, so Best Buy bought Future Shop. Two selling the same products, but looking at it entirely different how you do that. Okay, so here's the example. Best Buy has people working there, and I'm sorry to all the Best Buy employees that are watching this. They don't know anything about any of the products in the store. They're virtually there to say, hey, can I help you? And then they know about as much where those products are in what aisles as you do visiting the store for the first time.
Yep.
No help. So in that model, I can see people like myself that buy a lot of tech, as you can see. I don't need to go to the store because there's no benefit. The person knows nothing that I'm going to interact with.
Yep.
Future Shop was the opposite. Yep. Future Shop had people that were ex-camera people. They were interested in photography. They knew things about the products, and so there was a benefit to go to the store because they could assist you. Yep. They would drag me into the store because I knew it would help me select the best product for its use.
100%.
Right? That to me is so. If ag retail goes the Best Buy way, well, yeah. The person at the station is going to become more of a secretary than anything. But if they go more of the Future Shop way, and they're helpful, they're knowledgeable, which I believe they are.
Yep.
Right? there will be a place for those people, and we will not see a complete move to all online like some people are talking about.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think you look at it from, there's going to be different, everyone's always thinking, okay, well, there's going to be one type of egg retail in the future. And I would disagree. You're going to have numerous different types, and they're going to have different overhead structures. They're going to have different service models. You're going to have the traditional plain and simple bricks and mortar that might not get any sort of digital portal. You're going to have an omnichannel, like a Nutrien is a good example. You're going to have the FBNs who are direct to the farmer and have a e-commerce component, but do so in a direct way. And then you're going to have marketplaces, which are more of these kind of abstract places where these egg retails can go on to the marketplace, or the suppliers and manufacturers can go onto the marketplace. So you see that with like commodity eggs in the US and that sort of thing. But even, you mentioned Best Buy, and I'm super fascinated by them in terms of how I won't get too much into it, Shaun, I'll bore everybody, but you look at how they've competed with Amazon, and they've actually done well because of how they've actually built their entire strategy around the fulfillment, the use of their stores. And when I think of egg retail, it's going to be the same in terms of how do you actually leverage the distribution that you have? How do you get everybody aligned in terms of that online infrastructure and your sales team and all that? And I think that will be core to servicing farmers, because ultimately it's about how do we make life easier for the farmer at the end of the day. It's not about all these fancy strategies. It's about what can we do that is going to be profitable for us while making sure that farmer gets the optimal outcome for
Are we
him or her.
solving a problem? Right? That has to be in any sort of service or product development.
Yep.
How are we solving a problem for the customer? Whether that's the farmer or a regular consumer, are we solving a problem?
Yep.
Lindsay's making fun of me because I said Future Shop. What's next? Radio Shack. I've probably lost a lot of the younger part of the audience talking about Future Shop, but just Google it, look it up. It's anyway. Best Buy bought.
I knew Future Shop, so I feel real wise right now. So that's good.
Okay, question here from Earl. Earl says, thoughts on the future of 3D printing on the farm. This is one of those things that we used to hear, over the last couple of years, hearing a lot about 3D printing. What do you think?
Yeah, and I won't be able to, if everybody's asking questions I have no idea about, but I'm kind of like you, where it's been talked about a lot, where, is there a capability for the John Deeres or the Case or what have you to be able to give a blueprint of sorts for a farmer? They have their 3D printer sitting there in the shop. You can get a part printed out and you can install it yourself versus having to wait for 3 days or have to drive. I've heard of people having to drive clear across the prairies to pick up a part during harvest or what have you. Right? And so that could be a component, or even having that right there right at the Case dealership or whoever. And so that's probably the only insider thought I have around it. I haven't thought about it from any other perspective, but I think that's a really natural fit if it can happen.
Hey, if you're in Carrot River, Saskatchewan, Google it. It's the middle of nowhere. Having a 3D printer to make a part, especially with how dealerships don't stock anything anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And by the way, this bearing has to come from Utah or Indianapolis, and it's going to be here, it'll be here as quickly as possible. And I get why dealerships have lessened the amount of parts they carry. I'm not criticizing them, but it's the reality where we're at today. That 3D printer at the dealership, forget about just the farm, but maybe at the dealership, really, really makes some sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, and I don't know where those equipment dealers are at with it or what, but it seems like a pretty natural fit because of that. Like you said, that when it comes to servicing a farmer, that's about as strong of a value proposition as you can have right there, not having to drive from Carrot River to high-level Alberta or wherever, right? That's probably an extreme example, but it's,
hyperbole works.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Hyperbole works. Don't worry about it. Absolutely. Okay. I want to get your thoughts on this. Yesterday, actually, it's on today's RealAg radio show at 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. I have a discussion with Wes Lefroy with Rabobank from Australia.
Right.
And Rabobank in Australia just put out this new paper talking about how we are going to see a real further deepening integration of data sharing between farmer and the retailer, because there's a lot of stuff happening. There's some added complexities now. As farms get bigger, there's only so many decisions you can make as the farmer. Like your cranium can only contain so much in the hard drive.
Yeah.
And so getting that assistance from the input dealer or the agronomist is really going to allow you to sort of lighten that load, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is this something that you see?
Yeah, I think and I know there's all the apprehensions around ownership of data and all these sorts of things, but I think, generally speaking, all organizations have the farmer's best interest in mind. And I mean, there's always things that can go awry, but when it comes to there's so much complexity. Like you said, there's so many different pieces of data. We've been making gut decisions for really the entirety of agriculture being around, and now we're getting to the point where we can actually do things that are taking into account the soil type, the weather, the variety, the historical data around disease and spore loads and insects and all that, and actually make a decision that is truly beneficial for the farmer to the tune of 7-8 bushels an acre or significant ROI just by not spraying a fungicide or by getting that extra insecticide on. And so as much as I think there is reason to be a little bit apprehensive in some ways, I think it's going to move in that direction. It's going to be beneficial for the farmer making those decisions. I mean, there's always the route of you have the independent organizations like the Farmers Edges or some of these other organizations out there that will be able to support the farmer in that way, but there's still all the complexity around those crop inputs that you still need the retail and some of those manufacturers' insights and data around to deliver on. So
one of the questions I have is that increased integration between input dealer and farmer makes a lot of sense if you're dealing with one input provider. What about the farmer that shops around and he's buying from 5 different people?
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, I look at a Farmer's Edge as a good fit for that, obviously. But, I think there is going to be options. And, we see right now there's all these kind of point solutions. And so I think there will be more and more independent options. Or I think what we're also seeing, it's probably a better explanation, is the just focus around actually working together and actually having a bunch of different open source components, whether that's the Yaras looking at it, the John Deeres with all their different agreements. And so, as much as it is going to be somebody that shops around, you have all these organizations that have a ton of agreements, APIs, the ability to share that data. And I think that there's some validity to that actually coming to fruition that benefits the farmer, because the John Deeres and the Farmers Edges and everywhere, we know that there's challenges within this. There's going to be tons of it, but ultimately, if you try and own the entirety of what's going on that farm, you're probably going to end up with none of it. And so it comes down to being able to find those right partnerships and make those things that are going to work for that farmer.
One of my career plans at one point was to be an intellectual property lawyer.
Oh, really?
I would have been busy.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's a big part of all this space, for sure.
Yep.
Hey, we've been talking to Shane Thomas with Farmers Edge as well. He puts out a great newsletter, Upstream Ag Insights. Shane, if somebody wants to become a subscriber, how do they do that?
Yeah, just upstreamaginsights.substack.com and pretty simple to sign up there. And forward to hearing from people around it. It's super interesting, and if you want to learn more about Farmers Edge, farmersedge.com is or .ca, another option for that too.
For sure, absolutely. Okay, been a lot of fun. Thanks everybody for participating in today's RealAg live show. Like I said, today on Rural Radio 147, I have a conversation with Wes Lefroy from Rabobank. We also have Rick Bergman from the Canadian Pork Council. They've changed their ask a little bit in terms of BRM reform as we head into that October 1st Ministers meeting for agriculture. It's going to be a big part of the discussion, so you're not going to want to miss that. Tomorrow here on RealAg Live, we've got JP Gervais, Chief Economist with Farm Credit Canada. We're going to talk about inflation, talk about the Canadian dollar, GDP trying to recover as we move into the back half of 2020, as we get over this COVID hump. What does it all mean for agriculture? We'll have a great conversation with JP. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.